Good day, learners, and welcome to today's accounting lesson. My name is Mr. Simbi, and it is a pleasure to have you today. This lesson is brought to you by the Gauteng Department of Education in collaboration with Saibono Discovery Center, and it is being broadcasted by Pakama Research and Development Center. Once again, welcome to today's lesson. In today's lesson, it's going to be very interesting. So what I want you to do, I want you to find somewhere comfortable as we begin today's lesson. In today's lesson, we're going to be talking debtors reconciliation. Debtors reconciliation. So as usual, I want you to contact your friends, tell them that the lesson is now on, okay? Tell your friends the lesson is now on. What are the objectives that we intend to cover today? It's very simple. Today, we intend to focus on the following items. Number one, the reason for preparing the debtors reconciliation. Why should we prepare the debtors reconciliation? As well as the process of us preparing the debtors reconciliation. We'll also look at the debtors age analysis. If that one is a problem for you, please stay tuned in today's lesson. We will also look at internal controls on debtors. All right, so these are the things that we're going to be focusing on today. As we go on, we want now to define what is this debtors reconciliation all about, okay? Already you should know by now what is a debtor, okay? So your debtor, it is an individual or a business that owes us money because we have sold goods to them on credit. That is a debtor. But what is the debtors reconciliation then? The debtors reconciliation is an important process. Remember, it now is a process, all right? Because it confirms that the general ledger and the subsidiary ledger are accurate. So we want to confirm the accuracy of the general ledger as well as the subsidiary ledger. And it enables the business to collect the amounts of money that are due, especially those that we think they might be in becoming overdue. Now, the debtors control account is recorded in the general ledger. You know the general ledger already by now, and it represents all the money that is owed by customers to a business. So the debtors control, it simply represents all the monies that are owed by customers to the business. And the debtors control account shows the total. This is very important with where we are going. I want you to keep in your mind the word total, all right? So the debtors control account shows the total of all transactions with debtors taken from our subsidiary journals, all right? Now, it is very important that you understand that if your debtors control account has a total of 8,500, remember, this is what we're having in the debtors control account. Now, it should then speak to your debtors list. All right, so your debtors list now becomes the summary, all right, of the ledger accounts. So if in our debtors control we have 8,500, in the list it will now appear as we have debtor A. Debtor A becomes our debtor number 1, and then debtor B becomes our debtor number 2, and then debtor C becomes our debtor number 3, and then debtor D becomes our debtor number 4. So in total we have 4 debtors. And their total here, if you add up your 3,000 plus your 1.2 plus your 3,300 plus your 1,000, their total should as well give you 8,500. It should give you 8.5. That simply means your debtors list, the total of your debtors list, should be the same as that of your debtors control account. All right. Normally in the exam, there comes a question which says, why should the balance of the debtors control be the same as the debtors list? It is basically because they are all created from the same set of information. That is one reason. And as well as the debtors list is a summary of the debtors control account. As you can see here, you will see as we go further that if the balance or the total is not the same, their errors or omissions should be identified in order to reconcile the books. If there are errors, then we should then reconcile. Now, here is something very important. it has to do with transactions that involve debtors, Now, this is very important as we are going to go into the debtors reconciliation. Why am I saying that? Because here is the beginning point. This is more or less the foundation, because here we talk about a transaction, the source document, as well as the journal in which we record into. Now, I'm going to introduce something as well, which is the sign. The sign. When I talk about the sign, I'm simply saying, are we going to add or we're going to subtract depending on the source document? All right. This is where most of the learners have a problem with. Okay. They ask, Mr. Simbi, should I add or should I subtract? It is simple. If you follow today's lesson, you will then have an understanding whether you should add a particular amount or you should subtract a particular amount. Let's see with the very first one. The first one reads, okay, I'm going to treat this as my number one. It says, a debtor bought goods on credit. Once a debtor bought goods on credit, remember the source document is your invoice. We're good here. Now, in your mind, I also want you to know that whenever you see an invoice, you must think a plus. In other words, once we see an invoice, it increases our debtors. So the sign we're going to keep whenever we see an invoice is going to be a plus. So we're going to have a plus here. Where do we record that? We record that in the DJ, which is your debtors journal. Okay, let's go to number two. Number two now says, a debtor paid his account. When a debtor settles the account, the source document becomes a receipt. So remember, when the debtor settles the account, it reduces what they are owing us. Okay, it reduces what they are owing us. Therefore, the sign that is going to go with your receipt is going to be a minus. All right, remember this sign is very important, especially when we're doing questions. All right, I'll repeat again. Number two, when a debtor pays his account, when a debtor settles the account, it is a receipt on the source document, and then the sign should be a minus. All right, so let's go to the one that I'm calling number three. Allowed a discount to a debtor. When we allow a discount to a debtor, it is still a receipt, and then the sign will also be a minus. Okay, please follow me on number four. Number four, let's see what number four is now saying. Goods are returned by a debtor. It could be for a number of reasons. It can be wrong color, wrong size, damaged goods. Then they return the goods to us, and the source document becomes the credit note. But when goods are returned to us, then the sign should be a minus, because once goods are returned, it simply means what they were owing us is now being reduced. So the sign becomes a minus. You're correct. And then the next one becomes number five. Number five is now saying interest charged on overdue account of a debtor. Interest, which we charge on the account of a debtor which is now overdue. Normally, when debtors don't settle their accounts on time, we charge them interest. Interest is now used as a tool to encourage them to pay early. So when debtors don't settle their accounts on time, we charge them interest, okay? And then the source document becomes our voucher. And then when we come here on the general voucher, the source document, when interest is being charged, remember it comes to your general journal, comes to the GJ, and then the sign that I'm going to assign to it is a plus. Why am I saying a plus? The moment we charge interest on what the debtor is owing, that means that debtor is now owing us more. If a debtor was owing us 1,000 rands and then we charge them interest of 100 rands, that means at the end of the day that debtor now owes us 1,100. What do? We added. Hence here I said it's going to be a plus. And then the next one, which I'm going to call number 6 here, it is irrecoverable debt written off. Okay, when a debt is irrecoverable, when it's written off, okay, we record that in the GJ, and the source document is again your voucher, and then the sign should be a minus. In other words, we're going to subtract from our total debtors. All right, now it is also very important that you understand that the correction of errors will affect the debtor's control account. Very important. You're going to see much of this when I do this practically with you. But here's one important thing that I want you to know, that transferring of a debtor balance to the creditors will have an effect on debtors. All right, you would know that when we are transferring a debtor to a creditor, how do we do that? I'm going to show that as well when we get to an activity. Now, bad debts or recovered have zero effect on debtors' balances. I'm going to show you as we do the next activity that when bad debts are recovered, they have zero effect on the debtor's balance. All right. Now, what is the recording process that has to do with debtors? What is the recording process? Where does it start from? Okay. This is very important, especially if you are doing reconciliation, because with reconciliations, you are trying to correct errors, but you need to understand what was done initially for us to get to the error. Now, in order for you to know that, you need to know the whole process of asset recording, all right, from the source document until we get to our debtors control as well as the debtors list. All right, so the documents handed to debtors, in other words, first we have an invoice. Remember, invoice, we are selling, or invoice is a plus. All right, and then our receipts, this is when our debtors are paying, and then credit notes, this is when debtors are returning goods. And then transactions are recorded in the appropriate journals. If we talk about invoices, remember this would go to the DJ. If your receipts, this will go to the CRJ, and your credit notes, they'll go to the DAJ. Remember, we just did that on the previous page. And then once they are in the appropriate journals, remember, now we post to the general ledger. So here totals are post. Very important. When we are posting to the debtors control, we post totals. We are interested in totals. Hence, in that other slide, I said, whenever you hear the word total, please remember the word total is associated with the debtors control. Once you hear the word total, think debtors control. Once you hear the word total, think debtors control. And once they talk about individual accounts, here we're talking about the debtors ledger, because in the ledger, that's where we find debtor A, debtor B, debtor C, as well as debtor D. All right. And then here we come now to our debtors control account in the general ledger. All right. And then here automatically we end up in the debtors ledger account. And then eventually we have the balance of the debtors control account, which should be a debit balance as it is an asset account. So we have the balance of the debtors control account and as well as the total of the debtors list. And these should be equal. They should be the same. Why? Because they are created from the same set of information. Here's the set of information. All right. They're created from the same set of information. And as well as the debtors control is a summary of the debtors list. Okay, let us continue now. Let us continue. I want you to understand that when the debtors control and the debtors list do not agree, they should agree. They should agree. But in the event that they do not agree, that simply means there are errors. Okay? Errors simply means something was either added incorrectly, we added less, we added more, or things like that. And then the errors could be on the source document. If the error is on the source document, in other words, when we record the source document, there were errors. What should we do? We should correct it on the control as well as on the list. Very important aspect. Very important aspect. If the error is on the source document, we correct it in both the control as well as the list. Now, if the source document is not recorded at all, in other words, it's omitted completely, it means it's neither in the control nor in the list because it's omitted. It's completely not considered. Therefore, if we are to reconcile, we need to put it, yes, in both places. So my point number 2 is when a source document is not recorded at all, it never was recorded, it should then go to the control as well as the list. If there is an error, a recording error in the subsidiary journals, okay, it depends now with the type of error as I'm going to be dealing. You're going to see the type of errors. But when there's a recording error in the subsidiary journals, we correct it as well as in the control as well as in the list. And then if incorrect addition or total in the journal, we're talking about overcast or undercast. All right. If it has to do with totals, so the key word here is totals. Casting errors. In casting errors, we overcast. Overcast is when we have more. Under cost is when we have less. Once it has to do with costing, totals. Remember, totals is related to control. So once there's an error with totaling, costing, it has to go to the control account. And if there's incorrect posting from journal to the control account, if there's incorrect posting from the journal to the control account, we will therefore correct it only on the control account. If there's incorrect posting from the journals to the list, you're going to enjoy this, especially when I do it with figures. You're going to see in the next few minutes. If there's incorrect posting from the journals to the list or the account of the data. So here the error is on the list or the account of a data. So where do we correct it? Only on the list, that is the account of the data. Entry or total recorded on the wrong side. If an amount is recorded on the wrong side, you're going to see as we go later, if an invoice or it's a receipt or it's a credit note, if it's recorded on the wrong side, what then do? You double the entry on the correct side. This is very important, a very important principle. Once an amount or a total is recorded on the wrong side, we should therefore record it on the right side, but we should double the amount. Okay, very important. So I want you to focus on these. These are the roots. It is very important that you understand this, especially when we will now be dealing with the activities. And speaking of activities, we now have activity 1, which is coming from the November 2021 question 1. This is just an extract. We're going to do only a part of it. Let's hear what the question is saying. Activity number 1, debtors reconciliation. And it reads, Zigzag Traders sells ladies' clothing on credit. So they sell clothes on credit. Debtors are allowed a credit term of 30 days to settle their accounts. Let's see what else they say. 1.2, refer to information A and B. Use the table provided in the answer book to calculate the following. Okay, so there is an answer book which is already provided, and we're going to do our calculations there. The correct closing balance of the debtors control account on 30 September 2021 indicate changes with a plus. Remember, a plus simply means you are adding, and for an increase, and then a minus for a decrease, or 0 for no change. This is very important. If you feel that this transaction does not affect the control, you should put a 0 for no change. You should put a 0 for no change, because most of you just leave it blank, but I want to encourage you not to leave it blank, but follow the instructions of the examiner. As in this case, they're saying put 0 for no change. Very important aspect here. And the correct amounts owed by the following debtors only. So this is now our debtors list. This is our debtors list here. This is our debtors list. And in the list we have Mr. A. Barnes, Mr. C. Davis, and Mr. E. Foley. These are our 3 debtors. So this becomes the debtors list, therefore. Now, information A. It then reads, a balance on 30 September 2021 before taking into account the errors. So they're telling us before we consider the errors, because we want to consider the errors. Before we can consider the errors, there were balances, okay? And let's see what were the balances. The debtors control was 228,000. That is the balance of the debtors control before we can consider the errors. Let's see what they say about the list. The extract from the debtors list shows, number 1, Mr. A. Barnes is 13.5, Mr. C. Davis, it is 25,000, and lastly, Ms. E. Foley is 18.3. So they are giving us our starting ground. What I always tell my learners is, once you are given this, go and put them in your answer book. Go and put them in your answer book. In other words, if I were to do a T account, I would then simply say on my debtors control, this would be my debtors control. Remember, it's a plus and here it's a minus. So here you'll be having your balance and you'll be having your 228,000 already. All right, you're following. And then in terms of the list, I would show you how to open brackets. In simple words, if I were to show you in this very same list, I would say you'd come here and you'd say 13.5. You're simply saying, before I do adjustments, this one is to be in the bracket. And here you're going to have your 25,000. And the next one is going to be E-Folly, where it's going to be 18.3. Opening brackets is very important, very crucial. Before you start with anything, you need to open brackets. Why? Because as you are going to be doing errors, you are going to be starting from what you are given by the examiner. In other words, the balances are your starting point. You need to consider the balances before you can attempt on the errors. Let's now hear what the errors are saying. The following errors and omissions must be taken into account, okay? I hope you have your calculator ready, your pencil and your eraser. We're about to hit the ground running now. Let's see. It says now, the first adjustment or the first error, number one, it says an invoice. So I'm going to ask you again, what sign goes with the invoice? Before we go with the rest of the transaction, you have to know what sign is married to the invoice. The invoice is a plus. So here I'm going to have my plus. Before I can read the rest of the transaction, I need to know that my invoice is a plus. Let's hear what now it says. An invoice for 1,750 issued to A. Barnes was not recorded in the books of Zigzag Traders. What comes to your mind? You remember the table that I showed to you when a source document is not recorded at all. You remember that one? Okay, let's see now what would then happen. All right, so here we're given provisional totals. Remember, this is the debtors control, and we are also given the debtors list. That is Mr. A. Barnes. But what are they saying? An invoice was not recorded in the books. If it is not recorded at all, we should therefore record it. All right, so I'm coming now to my debtors control because we sold goods to A. Barnes and that was not considered. It was not recorded. That means what we have in the debtors control should be increased because we have a debtor whom we have sold goods to, yet the amount is not recorded. That means I'm coming here and I'm going to have, remember, sign is very important therefore. Okay, invoice plus. So I'm coming here, I'm going to have my plus 1,750. Very crucial. All right, very, very crucial. And now I'm going to come to A. Barnes. Remember now, this is in my list. This is in my debtors list. This is in the list now. In the list, I'm now coming to A. Barnes. Remember, I told you about opening the bracket. Here's my bracket here. And I have my 13.5. Whatever error or omission, I'm going to make it first starting with my 13.5. Okay, so never leave the 13.5 outside. You have to start from what the examiner gave you as the balance. What do? I then come, I think, what sign goes with my invoice? Definitely you're correct. It is a plus. So I'm coming to A. Barnes. I'm now going to say plus. It's going to be a plus 1,750. I'm not going to put anything here because I'm not done with my question. But so far, this is what you're having. When an invoice issued to A. Barnes was not recorded in the books, I have to come to my control and I have to come to my list and I'm adding those two figures. Okay, here is how it will appear then. Okay, here is my plus 1,750 and here is 1,750 added to A. Barnes. Okay, let's go on to the next adjustment. Let's hear. What are they saying? They are saying a direct deposit. A direct deposit, what does this mean? It means one of our debtors has paid us a direct deposit. So if it's a direct deposit, what do I do? The debtor is paying us. And if a debtor is paying us, do you know which sign it is? Okay, it is a minus. Once a debtor is paying us, it's a minus. It decreases what the debtor is owing us eventually. So it becomes a minus. So a direct deposit of 2,500 by E-Folly was correctly recorded in the DJ. So it's correct in the DJ, but incorrectly posted to the account of E-Folks. Okay, you can see here what is happening. The first initial is correct, EE, but this is Mr. Foley and this is Fox. We don't know who is Mr. Fox. Our data is Mr. Foley, not Mr. Fox. So a payment was done by Foley, our data, but we went to Mr. Fox, who is another data, and then we made a mistake there. Were we supposed to record it in eFogs? No. eFogs did not pay us. Who paid us? eFoley. So where is the error therefore? Here is the clue. Number one, was the error in the control? No, because they say it was correctly recorded in the journal. That means our totals are fine. Once our totals are fine, that means our control is tops. And once that is the case, our error therefore has to be in the individual accounts. In the individual accounts, where are we looking? We're looking in the list. Okay, so if I'm given my answer book, I'm now looking at number 2. Do I correct this in the control? No, I'm not going to do anything in the control because they're saying it was correct in the journal. It was correct in the journal. A direct deposit was correct in the journal. So once it's correct in the journal, that means when I come to my control, it's going to be no entry. No entry. Remember to put that no entry. Don't leave it blank, please, I beg you. Don't leave it blank. Put no entry. What is the next thing now? I need now to come to my debtors list. Let's see what's going to happen in the debtors list. In the debtors list, I've already opened my bracket. Who do I have? eFoley, 18.3. Now, there is a direct deposit. eFoley has paid. Already we now understand. If a payment has been received from a debtor, what sign goes with it? It is a minus. That means we should now come and correctly record it in eFoley. That is my minus 2,500. As simple as that. Once a debtor pays, it's a minus. Once the debtor pays, it's a minus. And in this case, it is correctly recorded in the journal. That means if it's correct in the journal, my control is okay. Then the only place I need to go and do the correction is in the debtors list. Because in the debtors list, that's where I made the mistake with the names. I recorded in eFogs instead of eFoley. So I just go and correct it in the list. Okay, let's see how it would appear if it was neatly written. Here, no entry, no entry. And then let's see what's going to happen now in my list. There is my eFoley, 18.3. Then I subtract the payment. Payments must be subtracted. Let's go on to the next activity. Adjustment number 3, error number 3 rather, error number 3. What does it say? The total of the debtors journal, was incorrectly recorded as 65,200 in the debtors control. I'm going to read it again. Listen now. The total of the debtors journal, which is 62.5. So the total of the debtors journal, which is 62.5, was incorrectly recorded as 65.2 in the debtors control account. So already here we can see that they are using the word total. Once they use the word total, it has to do with the debtors journal. All right. And once they're talking about debtors journal, we are therefore going to relate it with the debtors control, because totals have to do with the data or with the journals, and then they affect the controls. And then they say the total in the DJ of 62.5, it was incorrectly recorded as 65.2. So this error is overstated. The amount, I'm going to do some subtractions here, whereby we recorded 65,200, and then it was supposed to be 62,500. Therefore, we have overstated by 2,700. In my debtors journal, remember, my debtors journal is a plus. The debtors journal, what do we record in the debtors journal? Invoices. And invoices come with a what? A plus. So once your plus is more, then you now know what to do. And in this case, does it affect any data? Does it affect A. Barnes? No. Does it affect C. Davis? No. Does it affect E. Foley? No. It has to do with totals. Already in your mind, you should know. It's not going to affect the list, but it will affect the control. Let's see now. In other words, when I come now to my control account, I'm now saying I now need to correct. What am I going to do here? It's simple. If my debtors journal is overstated, that means I have more of the plus. Debtors journal plus, because in the debtors journal, we have invoices, and invoices are plus. This is where we record all our sales. What it simply means is our sales are overstated. And once our sales are overstated, we need to subtract, we need to reduce. And according to the instructions of the examiner, it should be a minus because we need that sign, which is a minus. And how much are we going to subtract? We're going to subtract 2,700 rands. This is going to be minus 2.7. Okay, let's see then. Does it affect the list? No, it's not going to affect the list. So here you can see it properly. It is my 62.5, subtract the 65.2. Therefore, you're going to have my minus 2.7. Do we record anything in the list? Once again, no. Why? Because the error was in the control. Let's quickly move on to the next error. Error number 4. Error number 4. It says, merchandise sold to C. Davis. Merchandise sold. So we sold goods to C. Davis of 3.5. All right. So we know once we sell goods to C. Davis, where should it go? It should go to the DJ. And once we sell goods plus, that should stay in your mind. Sold goods to C. Davis. We should go to the DJ and should be a plus. It was treated as a return of goods and recorded in the DAJ. So, in other words, once it is in the DAJ and they're treating it as a return, the sign for a return becomes a minus. I'm going to repeat again. We have sold goods, and once we sell goods, the sign should be a plus, and the journal should be the DJ. However, we recorded in the DAJ, and the sign, therefore, was a minus. What does that mean? It means we subtracted something that we were supposed to have added. And remember what I said in that box? I want to take you back again. If you record an amount on the wrong side, what then do? You put it on the right side twice. In other words, if I'm to show it to you again, remember what happened here. If I am in the debtors control, here's my plus and here's my minus. All right. And my invoices are here and my credit notes are here. So we sold goods of 3.5, which is supposed to be an invoice. It was supposed to come here. However, we then recorded it on the minus side. We treated it as a credit note. That should not have happened. Therefore, how do we correct it? Remember, the error is actually happening in the journals. That means the whole posting was with error. That means we need to control it in both places. That is the control as well as the list. Let's start with the control. If I put an amount on the minus, yet it was supposed to be on the plus. In other words, what I did, I came here, I put a 3.5 here. And this 3.5 was not supposed to be here. It was supposed to be on the plus side. That means I'm going to put my first 3.5 to correct this error. And then now my account is now on 0. But I still have an invoice to record because merchandise was sold. So I'm going to bring another 3.5 here. That simply means the total that I'm going to record now becomes 7,000. And what sign will it carry? A plus. That means if I come now to my debtors control, I'm coming now to say plus 7,000. Why 7,000? 3.5 plus 3.5. Once an amount is put on the wrong side, you correct that error by putting it on the right side, but twice. You double the amount. Now let's come to C debtors. That means if it was an error in the journals, the posting to the control was with error, we've corrected it. And the posting to the individual account was with error as well. That means we need to correct now on C debtors. How do we correct that? Remember, what did we do in the control? We added first the 3.5. That means I'm going to come here. I'm going to say plus 3.5. Does it end there? No. I need to bring another 3.5. That means I'm going to come again and say plus again 3.5. Some of you would have simply come and said plus 7,000. That will still be very correct. Let's see how it should appear if it is neatly written. There it is, plus 7,000. Let's see what happens in the list. There you go. You start off with the 25,000. Don't forget that, learners. Don't forget that. And then you come to a 3.5 and another 3.5. Beautiful. All right. Please, let me reiterate on this. It is very important that when an amount is recorded on the wrong side, you correct it by putting it on the right side. But how many times, guys? Twice. You need to put it twice. Let's see what error number 5 has to say. Error number 5. And it reads, 5,200 received from D-Claim, a debtor whose outstanding balance was written off 6 months ago, was recorded in the CIJ as a receipt from a debtor. All right. So D-Claim, you can see D-Claim was not part of our debtors list, which we're dealing with now. So it says the 5.2 which we receive from D-Claim, we receive 5.2. Once we receive it, remember, the sign will be a minus. I want you to get it there. If we receive 5.2 from a debtor D-Claim, whose account or whose outstanding balance was written off. Written off simply means we had declared him a bad debt. Okay? Written off, it means we had declared him a bad debt. It was written off as a bad debt 6 months ago. When we received the amount, we were supposed to record it as bad debts recovered, but we made an error. We did not record it as bad debts recovered. However, it was recorded in the CRJ under the debtors column as a receipt from a debtor. I'm going to repeat again. When we have a debtor who's owing us, and then we write him off, okay? Write him off. Once he's written off, it means he's now a bad debt. He's no longer part of our debtors. If that amount is later recovered, it is now going to be treated as bad debts recovered. It will not fall under the debtors column in the CRJ. Rather, it will be bad debts recovered. Now, the error made in this case was the amount which we received from a debtor which was written off, a bad debt, was not recorded as a bad debt recovered. It was recorded as if a good debtor is now paying us, which is not the case in this regard. What then do? We have received amount of money from a debtor who is no longer part of our debtors list because we have written him off as a bad debt. But we recorded it as a receipt from a debtor. That is incorrect. Remember, once we receive money from a debtor, the sign becomes a minus. That means the error that we made, we went on to our debtors control and we subtracted from our debtors as if this guy was still a debtor, yet he was no longer a debtor. So what we did is we subtracted. We reduced 5.2 from our debtors. Was that right? No, because he is no longer part of our debtors. We have written him off. So if we subtracted in error, what then do? We go and we add it back. We add 5,200 back. We add it back. As simple as that. We add it back. Why? It was subtracted when it was not supposed to be subtracted. Okay, let's see how it would appear if it is nicely written. There it is, plus 5.2. So the simple trick, I want you to listen to this. The simple trick is, if a debtor is written off as a bad debt, he is no longer part of our debtors. Once he pays a letter, we cannot record it in the CRJ under the debtors column, but it should be written as bad debts recovered. Because once we write him off, it becomes a bad debt. You need to get this. Very important. Okay? Let's quickly see what adjustment number 6 is all about. Error number 6. And it reads, merchandise returned. Remember returns. It could be wrong color. It could be wrong size. Then it's returned. Once they return, do you remember the sign? Do you remember we spoke about it? What is the sign? The sign has to be a minus. When merchandise is returned, the sign is a minus. So let's read it again. Merchandise returned by A. Barnes was recorded in the relevant journal as 250 instead of 700. So once we record less, it is under. We have undercast. Once because we recorded as 250 instead of 700. So we have understated the amount. Instead of 700. So let's get the difference here. It was supposed to be 700. However, we recorded 250. Okay? What do you think is the difference? 700 minus 250. How much do you get, guys? Okay? You get 450. Thank you. It becomes 450. So let's now think what exactly happened. A debtor returned goods to us. And when we record it in the relevant journal, in other words, when we went to the relevant journal, we're supposed to record 700, but we recorded what? 250. What then does that mean? It means when we're posting an amount that is already wrong. Where do we post? We post to the control, we post to the list. So once an error happens in the journal, it's going to affect both the control and the list. You're correct. So both our control and our list will be understated by 450. But the key is, if goods are returned, what is the sign? The sign is a minus. What does that mean then? We subtracted 250 when we were supposed to subtract 700. Get this right. We subtracted 250. How much were we supposed to subtract? 700. So if we're to get to 700, that means we need to go and subtract more. Don't make a mistake of adding. You need to subtract more so that you have a total of 700 subtracted. That means if I'm to come to my debtor's control, I'm going to come here and subtract another 450 minus 450. You need to subtract more. Subtract 450. But then what happens to Mr. A. Barnes? With Mr. A. Barnes, it's going to be the same. Because when we are posting from the journal to the control and to the list, we made the same error. So it's going to be minus 450 as well here. Okay. Why am I subtracting? I'm subtracting because it is a return which was understated. So I needed to get to 700. I had only subtracted 250. So I need to subtract another 450. Let's see how it would appear if it is properly written. There it is. Beautiful. And then the last one, wonderful, minus 450. I know you are enjoying this, but let's see what the next adjustment is going to say. I believe this could be our last adjustment. Okay. And it reads, an EFT, remember, EFT, what does that mean? Payment. So before I go any further, I'm going to come here minus an EFT for 7,850, which was received from E40 as part payment of his account, was entered correctly in the relevant journal. Once they say it was correct in the relevant journal, that means my control is, that means my control is fine. It was correctly entered in the relevant journal. So I'm not going to stress about my control, because once it's correct in the journal, they're trying to tell me, don't focus on the journal. Let's see what they say. But no entry were made in the debtor's ledger, in the individual account. Remember the ledger and the list, the individual account. So they're simply trying to tell me, when you come to your control, there's nothing to correct because it was correct. It was good. That means here, what do I say? No entry. What did they say about no entry? You put a 0. 0 means no entry. Please follow the examiner's instructions. Put the 0. And then we come to e-folly now. It's an EFT, a payment. If e-folly is paid and no entry has been made, what is the sign that goes with the EFT? The sign with the EFT is a minus. That means I'm going to come here. It's going to be minus what? 7,850. Beautiful. Okay. Let's see then if we are to totalize this question. All right. Here it is. Beautiful. All right. There you go. All right. As we come to the end of this particular question, this is how your debtors control would then eventually look like. Remember, here's our 1,750, here's our no entry, our minus 2.7, our 7,000, our plus 5.2, our minus 450, here's our no entry again, and then we end up with our 238,800 rather, 238,800. Okay, let's see how the list is going to look like. Here's the list. It starts with your 13.5. Don't forget these opening balances. Don't forget them, please. Don't forget them. And then you come, you add your 1,750 minus your 450, and then you get your 14.8. And then you have a 13.5, your 3.5, 3.5, then you end up with your 32,000. Your minus 2.5 minus 7.8, 7,950. Okay, so this concludes our first activity. I know you are eager to do activity number 2. Without waste of time, let's dig in. Activity number 2, Mizi Boutique. That's a beautiful name, Mizi Boutique. It says, the debtors control account and the debtors list for February 2022 prepared by the bookkeeper contained errors and omissions. And then required. Use the table provided to indicate the corrections that must be made in the debtors control account and the debtors list. Provide figures and a plus. Okay, remember? Follow the instructions of the examiner. If they want a plus, give the examiner a plus. If they want a minus, give them a minus. A plus or a minus sign for each correction. A plus or a minus for each correction. Let's quickly go on to the information. It says on A, the balances, debtors control, 37,710. So this is the debtors control balance, and the list is 39,490. So these are the balances. Whatever we're going to be doing has to be based on these balances. Don't lose them. Don't ignore them. They have to be part of the question. They have to be part of the question. Let's see now adjustment A. Adjustment A, guys, it reads, no entry was made for an invoice. What sign is an invoice? An invoice is a plus. You remember what we said? An invoice is a plus. So no entry was made for an invoice of 7,440 issued to G. Gwen. No entry. Nowhere was it recorded. Where do you think, guys, we're going to record it? Once they're saying no entry was made, where do you think we're going to record it? Definitely, if there was no entry, you need to take it, number 1, to the control. But what is this? It's an invoice. An invoice comes with a plus. Plus what? 7,440. And then in the list, where do we find Gwen? Gwen is also in the list. So I'm going to come here, I'm going to say plus 7,440. That's how it's going to appear, because they're saying no entry. Once it's no entry, it means it was nowhere. What source document is this? An invoice. Once it's an invoice, what sign does it go with? It is a plus. And then you come here, you're adding, and you add as well. Let's see how it would appear if it is neatly written. There it is. Beautifully done. Okay? Let's go to the next error. Error B. It says, a receipt. Okay, I know already. Once they say a receipt, it means someone paid up. A receipt means a minus. Minus. Signs are very important, my dear friends. A receipt, which is minus for 9.4, issued to debtor B. Crowley, was recorded correctly in the relevant journal. Yet again, correct in the relevant journal. It is correct in the relevant journal. All right. It was posted incorrectly as 4,900 in the debtor's ledger. So they're telling me that my error is in the debtors ledger. Once they say debtors ledger, I'm focusing on my list. But it's a receipt of 9,400. But it was posted as 4,900. That means it was understated. So I need the difference here now, therefore. The difference between 9.4 and 4.9. The difference should be, how much do you get on your calculator? The difference would be, how much do you get? If you say 9.4 subtract 4.9, you should get 4,500. You get 4,500. That becomes your difference. Okay? And then, if it is a receipt, the sign is a minus. The receipt, the sign is a minus. So what we did is, a receipt of 9.4, when we went to the list, we did not subtract 9.4, we subtracted 4.9. What does that mean? We need to subtract further for us to get to 9.4. How much more do we need to subtract? We need to subtract 4.5 more. So I already have my minus sign already. I'm just going to come and say minus 4,500. Okay. Does it affect the control? No, it doesn't affect the control. Okay. Let's see what it appears. There it is, beautifully done. Minus 4,500. Why only in the list? Because it was recorded correctly in the relevant journal. Let's see what adjustment C has to say. An invoice. I'm going to give you a second now. Tell me, if they say an invoice, what sign goes with an invoice? Okay, think fast. An invoice. What sign is an invoice? You're very correct. An invoice comes with a plus. An invoice is a plus. An invoice for 1,360 issued to A. Naidu was correctly recorded in the DJ. Everything is fine here. But it was posted in error to the wrong side of the account in the debtors ledger. So they're telling us that the error is not in the control, because they're saying an invoice of 1,360 issued to Naidu was correctly recorded in the DJ. Once it's correct in the DJ, my control will be good. But here's the error. It was posted in error to the wrong side of what? Her account. Once they say her account, that referring to the individual account. Individual account is talking to what? The debtors list. There we go. So what does that mean? It is 1,360, which is posted to the wrong side. Wrong side means it is a plus, but it was posted to the minus. That's what it means. It is a plus that was posted to the minus. What then do we do? I have taught you right from the beginning of this lesson that if an amount is posted on the wrong side, what do? You put it on the right side. How many times? Is it once? No. But how many times? Twice. So you're going to come in here and say, we're going to add 1,360 times 2, which is going to give you 2,720. So there's two ways in which you can do this. You can come to the list and you can say plus 1,360 plus again 1,360. Or you can simply say plus, or here is my or you can say plus 2,720. Okay, so you can either show it like that, or you can show it as a full amount, plus 2,720. Why am I doubling it? Because an amount was posted on the wrong side. And we've agreed in this session that once an amount is on the wrong side, we put it on the right side, not once, but twice. Thank you, guys. Let's see how it would appear. Beautifully done. There it is. 1,360, another 1,360, and my total is 2,720. Okay, let's go and see how it would appear on adjustment D. And it reads, an EFT. Okay, so once I hear the word EFT, I already know what comes to my mind. Debtor is paid. EFT, a debtor is paid. Minus. Okay, EFT, debtor is giving me money. Once they give me money, I subtract. They have decreased what they owe me. It's a minus. An EFT for 1,350 received from Mr. D Zulu was recorded in the CRJ and posted to the debtor's control account and the debtor's ledger accordingly. D Zulu's account was previously written off. Okay. So where do we start from? D Zulu's account was previously written off. What have we learned in this session? If an account is written off, we call it a what? A bad debt. And once it's a bad debt, and then that guy decides to pay us, does it go now to my CRJ under the debtor's control column? No, it is recorded as bad debts recovered. So what they did, they took it to the CRJ, but then they were posting now to the general ledger. They posted to the debtor's control. Was it supposed to come to the debtor's control? No, because Mr. D Zulu's account was written off. He's no longer part of our debtors. I'm going to say it again. Mr. D Zulu's account was written off. Once it's written off, he's no longer part of our debtors. Therefore, we don't have to record him in the debtor's control. That was the error that was made. And it was also taken to the debtor's ledger. So two errors were made here. One in the debtor's control. The second one is in the debtor's ledger. What error did they commit? It's an EFT. That means they subtracted. Once it's an EFT, it gives us a picture of what they did. What did they do? They went and subtracted 1,350. Were they supposed to subtract it? No. So let's see how we can correct it. This is how we'd correct it. Was the error in the control? Yes. What did they do? They subtracted 1,350. Were they supposed to subtract it? Again, I repeat, no. So what do? I come and I say plus 1,350. Was the error made in the list? Yes. What did they do? They subtracted 1,350. Again, the question comes, was it supposed to be subtracted? Not at all. What do? I come and I add 1,350. That is how you correct the error. Okay, there it is. Nicely written. Plus 1,350 plus 1,350. Okay, let's quickly go now to adjustment E. Sadly, is the last error. Let's see here. A credit note. Okay, already you know now. Credit note, what does that mean? Credit note, a debtor is returned, goes to us for various reasons. So if goods are returned to us, what is the sign? Is it a plus? Is it a minus? A plus or a minus? Yes, it is a minus. So a credit note for 720 issued to W. Wallace was recorded in the DAJ as 270 and posted as such. So remember, here's the error. A credit note for 720. Here is my 720. 720 is the right amount. But it was recorded in the DAJ as 270. So what is the difference here? The difference becomes 450. It was recorded as. So we understated. We recorded less of the credit note. It was supposed to be 720, but we recorded 270. It is less by 450. Now, the question is, where do we go and correct the error? Let's read again what they say. Was recorded in the DAJ as 270 and posted as such. Where do we post? We post into two places, the debtor's ledger and the debtor's control. So they're trying to tell us the whole posting was with error. So if the whole posting is with error, where do we correct? Let's go and see where we can correct. Easily done already. We come and we say minus 450 in the control as well as in the list. Okay, since it's the last transaction, you're gonna get to see it twice. There it goes. You're gonna see it twice. Minus 450, minus 450 again. Okay, now we have now come to the end of this particular activity, and then my debtors control will now total with 46,050. All right, and my debtors list 46,050. Why should the two agree? Why should the balance of the debtors control be 46,050 and that of the list be 46,050? Because they are created from the same set of information, and the debtors control is a summary of the debtors list. Okay, I'm going to quickly now go on to something really exciting, which we call the debtor's age analysis. The debtor's age analysis. Okay, what is it all about? Definition. It is a tool that is used to manage outstanding debts and to identify these debtors who do not comply with the credit agreement. Okay, so we have debtors who will not comply. How do we identify that this debtor is not complying? We use what we call the debtor's age analysis. This is how we manage our outstanding debts. Outstanding debts, it is the monies that our debtors are owing us. How do we manage that? We use a tool called the debtor's age analysis. And then it displays a breakdown of debtors account balances for each specified period for selected debtors accounts or a range of selected debtors accounts. You're going to see as we do it, you're going to have names and you're going to see for how long they have been owing. The debtors age analysis is useful for what we call credit control. It helps a business to anticipate future cash flow problems. You can see the pattern with which your debtors are paying. Then you can anticipate that if the debtors continue to pay in this pattern, I will have cash flow problems. And therefore, you can plan accordingly. But you can only do that when you employ the debtors age analysis. As well as the debtors ledger is used to manage and monitor the accounts of individual debtors. Now, I want us to talk about this. This is very important, especially when you come to your internal controls for debtors. There is what we call the debtors clerk or the debtors credit controller. He or she is responsible, number one, to monitor. So they monitor the debtor's credit rating, that is before extending any credit to a debtor. We wouldn't want to sell goods to a debtor who is habitually not paying the accounts on time or oftenly not paying the account at all. So our debtors clerk now checks the credit record before we can extend any credit to potential debtors. Okay, and then they monitor debtors accounts to avoid exceeding of credit limit. This is very important because we wouldn't want our debtors to buy beyond what we allow them to. And the person that is responsible to monitor this is what we call the debtors clerk. They monitor the debtors account so that we don't allow debtors to buy beyond the credit limit. I'm going to explain later what is the credit limit. The person also ensures that payments are received as per agreement. Okay, if payments are supposed to be received within 30 days or within 40 days or 60 days, the debtors clerk is responsible for ensuring that as well. And they also approve the credit sales before any order is delivered to a customer. They have to approve the credit sales. Now, let's look at the debtors age analysis. How to approach it, especially if it comes in the exam. Identify figures and quote names. Remember, this is a very important aspect in accounting. Okay, you need to identify figures, percentages, all right? Figures. You need to identify these figures. But not only that, when you deal with the debtors age analysis, you need to point to the name of the debtor. Which debtor is defaulting? Is it in terms of credit limit or is it in terms of slow paying? You have to identify figures and names. Remember, figures and names. These two go together. Figures as well as names. I'm going to say it again until you remember it. Figures and names. All right, let's go on. You need to identify problems and provide solutions. Okay, you have to think on your feet. If we're having debtors that are defaulting, what then can we do? Remember, in accounting, we don't only identify problems, but we need to be solution oriented as well. We need to provide solutions to our problems. Problems reflected by the debtors age analysis. Let's look at them. Number one, slow payers. What are slow payers? It's someone who's going to pay this month, then they forget about it, then they pay again after 2 months. Those are what we call slow payers. We identify them through the debtors age analysis, and these are problems. What other problems can we talk about? Debtors who exceed the credit limit. A credit limit, it is the maximum amount that we allow a debtor to buy. For example, if we give a credit limit of 10,000, they can only buy up to 10,000. we don't allow them to buy beyond 10,000. That is their credit limit. Continued sales to defaulting debtors. So these are problems. If a debtor is defaulting, that is number one, he could be a slow payer or is exceeding his credit limit, then we continue selling again to those debtors. That simply means we are not being proactive. Therefore, these are some of the problems that we are going to try and find out in our debtors age analysis. Remember, slow payers. Number two, debtors who exceed credit limits. Number three, continued sales to defaulting debtors. Activity number one is coming from the November 2021 question 1.3. And now let's refer to information C. Let's see what it says. Explain 3 different problems highlighted by the debtors age analysis. And then we need to provide, remember, number one, what do they want? They want the name. What else? Figures. Those two, please don't make a mistake. They want names and figures. It says provide the name of a debtor and all the figures in each case. Let's go and see. The age analysis is compiled on the 30th of September, the year 2021. Okay, so if we're just looking at it, we have Mr. J. Blom. All right, so here our credit terms are that debtors should pay within 30 days. Okay, these are the credit terms. But already we can see Mr. J. Blom has an amount which is now on the 60 days here, which is the 20,000. All right, so that is another thing. And then let's look at credit limit. Has he exceeded the limit? It is 52 and his balance is 45. So in terms of limit, he's okay. Let's go to ZP, and then here is Mr. ZP, and then we have ESSA, all much, and then we have the total of other debtors. Now, I want us to look into the question now. What is the question demanding us? Here's the age analysis again. And then remember, we want debtors that are problematic. Number one, we have debtors that are not adhering, they are not complying to adhere is to comply to credit terms, or these are debtors that are slow payers. Which debtors are not adhering? All right, number one, let's look at J. Blom. Remember, I spoke about J. Blom earlier on. J. Blom has an amount of 20,000. This is the 20,000. It has exceeded the 30-day credit terms. The 20,000 is now on the 60-day. So it has exceeded the 30-day credit terms. So number one, he is not adhering to the credit terms. What are the credit terms? 30 days. And he is now owing for 60 days. So number one, J. Blom is not complying to the credit terms. Let's look at another one. We have another debtor called All March. Here is All March. All March is a slow payer. How do we know he's a slow payer? There is no amount in the 30 days. There's no amount in the 60 days. And then is owing for more than 90 days. All right. So All March is a slow payer. That is one aspect that we can identify with All March. Is a slow payer. All right. And then you would then see that it says 28% of the debtors do not comply with credit terms. Okay, let's see, how do we get the 28%? You have your 21 as well as your 7. So if you add your 21 and your 7, that is how you get your 28%. It's your 21 plus your 7. That is how you get your 28%. So these are debtors that are not complying. Okay, everything that is beyond the 30 days, these are debtors that are not complying. It is your 21 and your 7. So 28% of debtors are not complying. But in the event that you're not given this 21 and the 7, how then would you calculate? You would then have to say 50,148, which is this one, plus your 16,716. Okay, you add those two, it should give you a total of 66,000. Should give you a total of 66,864. And then you divide it by your total balance, which is 238,800. You multiply this by 100 over 1, and then you still get your 28%. So 28% of the debtors are not complying with the credit terms. This should be a concern to the business, especially debtors like Allmatch, who are slow payers. It should be a serious concern. Let's look at other problems as well. The other one is we have debtors who are exceeding credit limits. Okay, credit limit. Let's look first. Let's research. Is J. Blom exceeding? No. His credit limit is 52. That means we can allow him to buy for 52. So far, he's bought for 45. Mr. ZP, we allow him to buy for 22. That is his ceiling, his maximum. But so far, he's bought for 29. That means he has exceeded his maximum. He should be buying for 22, but yet he is now owing 29. So Mr. ZP, there is a problem there. He has exceeded his credit limit by how much? 7,000. How do we get 7,000? He's owing 29, yet he should only be buying for 22. So it's 22 and 29, so he's exceeded by 7,000. That is a concern, okay? Because remember the person that is responsible for managing this? Yes, the debtors clerk. All right. Let's look at another problem again. There is poor or ineffective internal controls over debtors. Why would we say that? Because we're allowing defaulting debtors to buy on credit, yet they've exceeded their limit. Okay? Do you still remember which debtor had exceeded his limit? Yes. Let's start with a debtor like ZP. ZP, he has exceeded his limit. It is 22 limit, and then he has 29, yet he has a current of 3,000. Let's go to others. We have Allmatch, who has a current amount of 2,000. Here's Allmatch. His current is 2,000 here. He has current of 2,000 for Allmatch. Whilst 4,000 of what is owing, he has, remember, it is not in the 30, it's not in the 60, it's actually in the 90. So he has not been paying, and yet we have still allowed him to buy goods, which is this 2,000. So there is poor control on our debtors, because there are debtors who are slow payers. They are showing that they are defaulting, yet we still allow them to buy again on credit. Yet it should have been to the debtors, please settle your account first, then we can sell goods to you. Yet we still allow them to buy, and they have shown to be defaulting. So there is definitely some poor control of our debtors. Let's look at J. Blom. If you look at J. Blom, his current purchase of 18,000, this is his current purchase of 18,000, whilst 20,000 is on the 60 days. We should have told him to pay the amount that is overdue, which is the 20,000, before we can allow him to buy for 18,000. Okay, and then there are other debtors with current purchases of 55, which is this one. The other debtors, they've bought for 55, 244, whilst 30,148, here's the 30,148, as well as the 12,712 is exceeding the credit terms of 30 days. So you can see here is another serious problem, that we still allow them to buy here, yet they are showing to be defaulting here. Defaulting debtors should not be allowed to continue purchasing, because it will affect the cash flow of the business. Okay, now I want us to come now to the next paper, which is the amended DBE 2017, question 1.3. Question on activity 2, it says, explain how debtors age analysis can assist with internal control over debtors. How does it help? Number one, it gives an indication of debtors whose accounts are overdue. Okay, we've seen that already. Debtors' accounts were overdue. It also gives an analysis that will identify reliable debtors. If we have reliable debtors, what then do? We increase their credit limits because they are reliable. They can pay. Let's allow them to buy more. So we can do that when we have the debtors' age analysis. It assists the business to review the credit limit that is allowed to debtors. We can then review if debtors are defaulting and they have a 20,000 credit limit, we reduce it maybe to 15 or to 10,000, such that until they show that they can pay nicely or they can pay well, complying to the credit terms, then we can increase their credit limit. But once we can see that debtors are slow payers and defaulting, we reduce their credit limit. So the age analysis also assists the business to review the credit limit. Once in a while, we go and check how are they paying. Should we increase or should we decrease their credit limit? It assists the business to identify debtors who should not be granted additional credit sales until accounts are paid up. So we simply say, okay, your account at the moment is temporarily suspended, okay, frozen, so to say, until you pay off your account. Then we can resume selling to you on credit. That will be identified from the debtors age analysis. Here's the debtors age analysis with D. Pillay, D. Gauss, Ngosi, Patel, as well as Peters. Let's see what it says. Calculate the percentage of total debts exceeding credit terms. Okay, so our credit terms is 30 days. So we want the percentage of debtors that are exceeding the credit terms. What do we do then? It means what we want is the amount that is exceeding. First, 60 days, 90 days. The total, 14,560, 14,560 plus 2,080. Give me the total. What do you get on a calculator? It gives me 16,640. I divide it by the total of amount owing, which is 41,600. I multiply this by 100 over 1. It should give me 40%. Okay, let's see. That's exactly how we should show it. Okay, 40%. These are the debts that are exceeding the credit terms. And there it is. Nicely written. Here's my 14,560 plus my 2,080 and over the total, which is my 41,600. It gives me my 40%. Okay. Now, here's another question. Explain one problem with figures. With figures. So my problem should not just be me writing words, but I have to indicate what? Figures relating to D. Pillay and Mr. W. Patel. Okay, let's see. Here's Mr. D. Pillay. Here's Mr. D. Pillay. And here's Mr. W. Patel. What are their problems? What can we see here so far before we go any further? Okay, limit, amount owing. You see that? So already Patel has exceeded his credit limit by how much? 1,800. That is problem with Patel. Okay, with Pillay rather. Pillay has exceeded the credit limit by 1,800. There's one problem that we can pick quite easily. Let's look at W. Patel. W. Patel credit limit is how much? 14, but the amount owing is 11,192. That is not a problem. Current month, nothing here. 30 days, nothing. But then you have 60 days and 2,080. What does that mean? That means he's owing 11,192, which is falling beyond the 30-day credit terms. So he's not complying to our credit terms, as he has 11,190, which is falling beyond the 30-day credit terms. Let's see it neatly written. Number one, here he has exceeded his credit limit by 1.8. You remember what we just alluded to here. That is on D. Pillay. On D. Pillay, exceeded the credit limit by 1,800. Why? Because he is only supposed to purchase for 10, but he is purchased for 11.8. He's exceeded the credit terms of 30 days. That is Mr. D. Patel now. He's exceeded the credit terms of 30 days. The 11,192, which is the total of this two, which is this one here. The 11,192 exceeds the credit terms. His balance has been outstanding for 60 and 90 days. So he is not complying to the credit terms because his balance is falling over 60 and 90 days, and the total is 11,192. So that is the problem with Mr. Patel. And explain two problems relating to Mr. D. Gauss, but you need figures as well. Explain two problems with figures relating to debtor D. Gauss. Let's see, where's Mr. Gauss? Here is where Mr. Gauss is hiding. Let's see. There were two problems relating to Mr. D. Gauss. Let's quickly look at it. he has exceeded the credit terms. Okay, he's a slow payer. Let's look at it. His credit limit here is 14 and he's 13. So in terms of credit limit, is okay. But in terms of the credit terms, he has exceeded the credit terms. The 5,000 is falling beyond the 30 days. And you can express that as a percentage. How would you do that? You take your 5,448 and then you divide it by the total which is owing, which is 13,450, which you find over here. You multiply this by 100 over 1, that gives you 40.5%. So 40.5% of what is owing has exceeded the credit terms. That is problem number one. Okay, you can either write it as figures here to say 5,448 is owing beyond the 30 days. Or you can show it more preferably as a percentage to say 40.5% of his account is falling on more than 30 days. Problem number two, the business has allowed him to buy for 4,100, which is the current, even he does not pay on time. So he's a defaulting debtor, you can see here, but we still allowed him to buy goods on credit. That is the two problems we can identify on Mr. Digaus. He is a debtor who is not complying, but we went on again and sold goods to him, even though he is not complying. Now, the last question, it has to do now with internal control. Okay, very important. It is extracted from the NSC November 2021. And the question reads, D. Susan, a member of the sales staff is also responsible for, so Susan is responsible for number one, collecting cash from customers who choose to pay in this way. So she collects cash, that is number one. Number two, receiving goods returned and issuing credit notes to customers who return goods. Okay, let's see. Now, the internal auditor is not happy with Susan's job description, as he feels it has the potential for fraud, which could lead to loss of cash and trading stock. So there is the potential of fraud because number one, she collects cash from customers who pay whenever they pay in cash, but she also receives the goods that have been returned and issues credit notes to customers who return goods. Provide 2 points to support the internal auditor's concern that Susan's job description could lead to potential fraud. What do we see here? Number one, there are too many related functions performed by one person which could compromise the efficiency of the job. In other words, if one person is doing many tasks, the aspect of efficiency gets compromised. So she is doing too many functions. So it will now lead to inefficiency in some of the aspects. Lack of supervision could lead to negligence. Negligence is when people don't pay due diligence to what they are doing. So lack of supervision will lead to negligence and rolling over of cash. That is the theft of cash, as there is no authorization for returns and not applying returns policy effectively. Remember, she is the one who received the returns and then issues the credit notes as well. So there's lack of supervision in that aspect. There's no division of duties. Temptation to engage in fraudulent transactions or manipulate sales can be created. As she is doing it on her own, there is likely to rise temptation in engaging in fraudulent transactions, as well as manipulating sales or returns. And she can create false documents to indicate the return of goods, yet goods were not returned. And there can also be mismanagement or poor record keeping. Remember, she is recording everything so she can manipulate stock sheets or the debtor's records. There's no continuity of tasks. Tasks may not be done, may not be completed. And there can be a lag. A lag simply means a delay if Susan is on leave, because she is the one who's doing all these tasks. So if Susan goes on leave, or if she gets sick, it means there is going to be a lag, there's going to be a backlog in the issuing of credit notes to customers, as well as the collecting of cash from customers. So there's no continuity of tasks. That is a serious problem for any business. And cash is easily stolen especially if they are paying in cash. We'd rather encourage that our debtors pay with credit cards or pay via EFT or any other electronic payments which are relevant in these days. Now, learners, as we have come to the end of our session, I do hope you have understood today's lesson. As I make a quick recap, remember we did the debtors control when we spoke about the debtors control account and the debtors list while we reconcile the two. If there's an error in the debtors control and if there are errors in the debtors list as well. And then we went on to do activities. It is important that you go back to those activities and thoroughly work on them. In today's lesson, we also looked at the debtors age analysis, which is a very important tool, which looks at the behavior of our debtors. Are they paying on time? Are they exceeding credit limits, as well as are they complying to their credit terms? And we also realized that once we mention the debtors age analysis, we have to comment on it using names and figures, and percentages are of great importance when we analyze the debtors age analysis. We also looked at the internal controls of debtors, and we realized that aspects such as the division of duties, supervision, as well as the continuity of tasks and using electronic payments is an advantage for any business. As we come to the end of the session, I want to thank you for joining me today. I hope to see you again soon. But until I see you, continue calculating. Remember, accounting becomes exciting once you continue practicing. Thank you for watching this lesson, and remember to sanitize and keep safe, wear your mask and maintain social distance. Until again, please take care.